So our first panelist here is Erica Minio. She, her pronouns. She's a UC Davis student majoring in biological sciences and minoring in animal studies and music. And in fact, on the music area, there is exciting news because Erica was recently competing in the UC Davis-wide concerto competition. So anybody at UC Davis could enter this, and she won. So actually, tomorrow she is going to be doing a solo Schumann at the Mondavi Center with the UC Davis Symphony Orchestra, and I believe that there are still tickets available for this if you want to talk to Erica afterwards. She has to leave because she's super busy, but she might have 10 minutes to talk to you about that. Another thing about Erica that is really clear if you get to know her is that she's really one of these people who defy this empathy stereotype about autism that's been mentioned in some of the previous talks. She has this very strong sense of empathy, especially, well, not especially, but including towards animals and people. And she is planning to move on to veterinary school. And she's a very strong advocate in the neurodiversity world. We co-founded with one other person the Autism and Neurodiversity community at UC Davis last year, which is a new peer support group for autistic students, and she's currently our vice president. So I need to welcome Erica to give a quick 8-minute talk. I should have said this before, but what our structure is going to be is I'll just ask everybody to give a quick talk because really I don't want to predefine questions. So this is for people to say whatever they think as neurodivergent people, and then we'll open it up for questions from the whole audience.
So I was diagnosed as autistic in 2017, the day after my 18th birthday, and I still consider that to be the greatest birthday present I was ever given. I was never a big fan of the deficit, disorder, and other medical model language that was being used to describe autism. However, after being formally diagnosed, I was fortunate enough to learn about the neurodiversity paradigm as well as the social model of disability, and I credit both for influencing the way I view my being autistic. Yes, definitely as a disability, but also as a gift that has lent me many strengths. I just think the pervasive medical language used to describe autism and other neurodivergent neurotypes completely misses out on all these strengths. Ultimately, I think that does have a negative impact on neurodivergent people's mental health, as well as contributing to the widespread stigma against us in today's society, as well as potentially setting low expectations for us. I think the ultimate goal for certain disability-related challenges lies not in elimination, but rather self-reflection and devising accommodation to either lessen the challenge or turn it into something positive. For example, my extreme sensitivity and reactivity to noise could be viewed as a flaw or a deficit that needs to be trained out of me. Or society and I could work to listen to my body, becoming then more self-aware, and then implement accommodations or make changes to make things not only more comfortable for me, but also to highlight the innumerable strengths of such sound sensitivity. If the surroundings are too loud, I simply wear earplugs, or even avoid certain areas of the UC Davis campus that are too loud for me. I take all my exams in a reduced distraction testing environment as part of my course accommodations. In a class, I might ask my professor or my TA to emphasize a quieter classroom environment, or to let me know ahead of time if lectures will incorporate loud noises so that I can adequately prepare. Interestingly enough, my classmates have remarked that they also appreciate a quieter and more sensory-friendly classroom, as well as prior warning to loud noises. So it's almost like these societal changes, if you will, have a positive ripple effect, impacting others besides myself. In addition to these accommodations, working with a challenge instead of fighting it allows me to harness its potential strengths. Sound sensitivity has myriad positive effects, in music, for example, something I can greatly appreciate as a pianist and a violinist. I can channel my reactivity to unpleasant sounds into feedback for myself and my fellow musicians so that we can ultimately create better music. It's also allowed me to experience music much more viscerally and profoundly as a living, breathing entity, that must be nurtured and interpreted thoughtfully. In terms of mental health, I think this pathology model is not at all conducive to good mental health outcomes, as my own psychological well-being can attest. Telling an already vulnerable and marginalized population that they're disordered, or that the way their mind works is fundamentally wrong, is simply setting them up for these poor mental health outcomes, something our club members have spoken about at length in the past. In my experience, once I began accepting the fact that I was autistic and that autism does have its strengths, that there are other people out there in the world, just like me, who lead happy, healthy, and fulfilling lives, and that it's okay to embrace myself for who I really am, that was the big paradigm shift for me. And I think that's helped to improve my mental health, even in a system that still sometimes insists on calling out my flaws and labeling me as disordered and broken. I definitely think autism lends many strengths, however. For me, those would include sound sensitivity, being very observant and attentive to detail, something that's very important in the veterinary world. Having profound empathy towards animals and humans, something I do hope to put to good use in vet school and in my future career as a veterinarian. Experiencing the world in a very visceral way, like living life in high definition with super sensitive microphones 24/7, as well as amplifying my emotions. Having a strong, unwavering moral compass, peer pressure doesn't really affect me, as my middle school classmates found out very quickly. Being extremely determined and gritty when it comes to achieving goals and advocating for causes that I believe in. The ability to hyper-focus on my schoolwork and in music and other academic materials, and the ability to have such profound passion for my intense interests, from cats to horses, veterinary medicine, music, nature, classic literature, and disability rights. I think it's much more productive to focus on these strengths and harness them into a career and making my life more meaningful, instead of trying to focus on eliminating deficits that may very well be a byproduct of an unforgiving, rigid society. Yes, autism is definitely a disability, but it's also definitely a gift. Thank you.
Our next panelist is Justin Simons, him, who studied political science at CSU Channel Islands, which I actually think is an important point because there's so little of the more social of the social sciences and the humanities in the autism world, but it is such an important lens as we look at all these political and sociological aspects, so I'm so glad there's more and more of that. Justin is actually an RA for Dana, who spoke earlier, and he's also found time for a lot of advocacy as a member of the Socialist Party. And he actually graduated 2 weeks ago, so another round of flapping applause. And he's planning to move on to graduate school to continue studying in this neurodiversity area, which is, of course, so important. So,
first off, I just want to say thank you to the UC Davis Center for the Mind and Brain and the UC Davis Mind Institute for allowing us the opportunity to speak on this panel today. I understand it is a privilege to be involved in this, and I appreciate the sincere efforts made to include neurodiverse advocates in such an important discourse. Personally, I want to have a special thank you to Dr. Dana Baker, who without her support and encouragement, I would not be here today. And I want to thank Patrick Doyer for allowing me the opportunity to speak here today, so thank you all very much. I suppose I should start briefly with the who, the what, and the why. So the who, really quickly, my name is Justin Simons. I am 28 years old. I was an undergraduate research assistant for Dr. Dana Baker, and now an alumni, officially, of California State University, Channel Islands. I have a bachelor's degree in political science and will be pursuing a graduate degree in public administration, pursuing concepts of neurodiversity. The what? I'm a political activist involved with the Socialist Party USA since 2010. I have been involved in political activism for more than a decade, from the Occupy Wall Street movement to organized labor to the anti-war movement even. Politics have played a very large role in my life over the course of this decade and oftentimes involving extensive and complex issues. Topics that more often than not have a strong personal connection to many people involved. In the context of neurodiversity, which is now becoming as much of a political issue as it is an issue of social inclusion, the matter of personal connection takes on a new meaning. The conceptions of neurodiversity being a sociality, as opposed to simply being a matter of condition, assuming a place in the annals of identity politics as a facet of social and political development and empowerment, really establishes new pathways for navigating new conditions and new frontiers. This new frontier is the frontier of the mind. And as someone who is autistic, this issue hits quite a bit hard for myself and my family, as well as my fiance, who is here as well, who is also neurodiverse. So this brings me to the why. So I was born on July 12, 1990. And what I was unaware of at the time was that on July 26, 1990, just 14 days after I was born, the Americans with Disabilities Act, the ADA, came into force under law. For those of you who don't know what ADA is, in short, the Americans with Disabilities Act was a landmark piece of legislation built upon the shoulders of extensive civil rights legislation and movements, including the Civil Rights Act of 1964. In short, the ADA made it illegal to discriminate on the basis of having a disability, and delineated the rights of individuals with disabilities, as well as the rights and expectations of businesses and institutions interacting with individuals with disabilities. Since the passage of ADA, as well as the ADA Amendment Act of 2008, countless millions of people have benefited immensely, as access to infrastructure and opportunities for individuals covered under the ADA have definitively improved in many other aspects of our society. What I didn't understand at the time, and from what I understand now, is that the interactions that have been taking place my entire life, from my education to the way I interact with my boss, had really been a product of a public policy. Though based on what I know today and what we might potentially know in the future, the definitions of autism and neurodiversity are in fact changing, not just as an understanding of sociality and a community, but in terms of how institutions and the economy interact with the neurodiverse community, as the neurodiverse community is in fact redefining itself. This, of course, brings me to the topic at hand, and that is the topic of neurodiversity and self-advocacy. More specifically, neurodiversity and democracy, and the conceptions of identity politics and how it will affect, and the effects of which it will have in public policy. Granted, the details of which are very, very hard minutiae, and I'm going to be very, very quick about it because there's a lot to talk about. Okay, let me get down here. So, democracy and definitions. The reason why I alluded to the ADA specifically is because it is a definitive example of a nationwide public policy in which individuals of neurodiverse communities are generally covered under. But with the changing definitions of neurodiversity, and moreover the development of a grassroots neurodiversity movement, there arises new challenges to manifest institutions that will enable and empower neurodiverse communities and will require the involvement of neurodiverse advocates participating in its construction. New laws being made, new standards being set, and institutions, programs, and policies flexible enough to meet that demand. Why is the conception of inclusion and democracy? No, the reason why the conceptions of inclusion and democracy are so important are because those laws, programs, institutions, etc., will require an input on the part of the subject under said laws, so ourselves. Understandably, that is in fact asking quite a lot regarding a great number of inflexible institutions. Given the state of politics in the United States today, and perhaps moreover the state of politics in the world, certainly that lends a degree of credence to that perspective, but not without hope. When I was diagnosed with autism at the age of 6 in 1996, looking back on it, I found it strange that no one had ever bothered to explain to me exactly what autism was. In fact, despite visiting a number of professionals throughout my life, I was never told what my condition actually entailed, other than what the symptoms of that condition may exist and what options might be available to support me. And I think that was part of the reason why it happened is because autism itself is still being defined. And that information on that subject, specifically in the 1990s and early 2000s, were still being studied and accounted for under the context of our applied scientific analysis. But what was understood was that there was a mandate that was being carried out under the letter of the law in order to ensure the legal and financial accountability of that said institution. What I understand now is that this is not an aspect of deprived agency, but rather a lapse in communicative efforts to include members of our neurodiverse community in the discourse on how to engage in these issues being established on the basis of neurotypical application. which itself is being dealt with in the present, and it's still a matter of exploration and contention, and in the context of the law and between advocates, activists, and concerned parties alike. Going forward, there is a responsibility on the part of the institution of law and governance to provide the equitable inclusion of all people under its jurisdiction. But there is a growing movement, building a new facet of social development that we are experiencing today and of which we will continue to see in the future. Thank you.
And the next introduction is introducing Matt Harmutz. Him who's going to get actually a slightly skimpier introduction because what he's going to be talking about is more closely related to his own story, so I don't want to steal his thunder. But he's actually a member of a public speaking group locally called Fly Brave. Some of you might have been in this very room in December. I was not here, unfortunately, but I heard wonderful things about the presentations that Fly Brave did then. They're also going to be at the Summer Institute, the Mind Summer Institute, registration for which I'm told is now open. And really what Fly Brave is it's a group of people who are sharing their own perspectives and stories, which, as Joseph was pointing out in his talk earlier, is such an important and empowering thing. So without further ado, Matt.
Hello everyone, thank you for having me here, and thank you Patrick for the quick introduction. So again, my name is Matt Harmutz, nice to meet all of you. I graduated from UC Berkeley and I majored in Asian Studies, which basically is Asian history and literature. And for me, academics, while challenging, they were far less challenging than assimilating socially. And after I graduated from college, I ended up taking a job that played to my weaknesses rather than my strengths. It was at the Aria in Las Vegas, so it was the resort and casino there, really large, and it's obviously a place that's very difficult for anyone who has autism. I didn't really think too much of it at the time. I thought that it would not be that difficult, but that was my first job experience, so I had no idea what I was really getting into. And in that job, it required multitasking, it was very fast-paced, it required a really good executive function, which is something that I lack, because once I get into an activity, I have a hard time moving from task to task. It's a very social environment, of course, and I would say that I don't have the best social skills, especially at that time when I was severely lacking. And then, of course, picking up on social cues is something that I've always had difficulty with and I'm still learning today. And then, of course, motor skills. I'm also suspected of having dyspraxia, which I think was actually mentioned earlier today, but dyspraxia is basically a disability which primarily focuses on having difficulty with fine motor skills. And for me, I have a really hard time doing anything that's fine motor related. And on that job, I had to do a lot of fine motor related tasks, and I always struggled a lot with them. And while I was on the job, I always really just felt like a social outcast. I never really got along with anyone. I didn't really talk to anyone on the job. And it wasn't until the end of the job where I actually met one person who I started to form a connection with, but at that point, I had just gone so downhill, and my mental state had gotten so bad that I didn't really realize that I'd really started forming a connection with him, and shortly thereafter I did quit the job. Unfortunately, I only lasted at that job for 3 months, and I basically stayed there for as long as I did, because even though after 1 month I knew it wasn't for me, my dad helped me get the job, so I didn't want to let my dad down, nor did I want to let my dad's friend down. My dad also suggested at that time, while I was on the job, that, hey, Matt, maybe you could write a book about your experience there. And I thought that might actually be a really interesting idea. Working at the Aria Hotel, that's not a typical experience for someone with autism to work in a large casino resort like that. And that's another reason why I stayed there. So after I quit the job, I went into a huge depression. I thought that my life was over. I didn't really know what to do. I remember I couldn't even get out of bed. I felt like there was an invisible rock on top of me. It was a really difficult period of time in my life. I felt more suicidal than ever. Although I never attempted suicide, I had never thought more about it at that time than ever. I remember just looking shortly after I eventually got medication. I remember just thinking about overdosing, because I didn't know what to do. I thought that no one cared about me. Thankfully, I did eventually get out of that period. I did meet with psychiatrists, so I started getting medication, of course. My mental state started getting much better. I started attending weekly group sessions with my psychiatrist, and that helped a lot because I met a lot of other neurodivergent people there, and we shared very similar experiences, and it helped just make me more aware that I'm not the only one going through those difficulties, that other people were also going through those same difficulties. I also started reading books about people with autism. I wanted to see how others dealt with their own situations. So I read a lot of New York best-time sellers of people who went through difficult situations and how they overcame their own adversity. And it really helped me a lot because it helped me understand how I could approach situations myself, and also helped me because I'm also hoping to write a book still. So that was good for me. I also eventually later on I started playing some online games, and this was actually significant because I had never really had a group of friends, and it was actually through playing an online game that I actually got my first group of friends, and I still play games with them, I still talk to them, and it's really nice. I've had friends here and there throughout my life, but I've never really had a true group of friends like that, and that was really meaningful to me. I started bonding better with my brother. I never really had a bad relationship with him, but I didn't really ever get along with him that much, so that was really significant. My mom's relationship with me started getting a lot better. I did something called the Access program at the Mind Institute, where many of those with autism, they come here, and I learned a lot through doing that. We learned social skills. My mom also attended the parent group, so she started having a better understanding of me. And it was through that was really significant that I eventually joined the organization that was mentioned earlier called Fly Brave, and that was basically a huge turning point in my life. When I joined Fly Brave, I didn't really know what I was going to do. I was told to do it just because I was asked to volunteer during the Access program, but it was really significant because I eventually ended up teaching a public speaking class there, and that's how we eventually came about with the class, or with the event in December. And really that was actually my first public speaking event in December, and it was really my first experience teaching, and it's really meaningful to me because it just really felt truly empowering for me. I also met John there, and that's Vanessa's wife. Vanessa's the runner of Fly Brave, and that was also very significant because meeting John, he's also a public speaker. I started feeling a lot better about myself having met him, and he also just gave me a lot of tips, so things started really looking up at that point. As I mentioned, I started teaching the class and started feeling a lot better about myself. And actually, I remember talking to my parents. It wasn't really until after that event in December that they really started seeing that this is actually maybe something I could do. Maybe Matt could have a career in public speaking. They weren't really supportive of it at first because they didn't really see it as a typical job. People don't really just go and, you don't apply online for a public speaking job. That's not really how things work, of course. But I think having seen that event in December, they realized that, wow, maybe Matt actually does have some talent in public speaking. Maybe it is something that he could do, and maybe it is something that it can help change the world with him speaking about autism and his own experiences, and really just showing people out there that there is hope for those who have struggled and that it's not the end of the world. And I think really, it wasn't until actually after this that I really finally started to accept myself. I'm really glad that I went through that job experience. Quite frankly, yes, it did suck. I wouldn't go through it again, but I learned a lot from it. I wouldn't take anything back from that because I don't think I would be the person I am today. I wouldn't be here had I not gone through that experience. And I think the most important thing that I learned is just to not let my weaknesses overwhelm me and instead look toward my strengths. And of course, not to victimize myself, because I know that I am capable of doing great things if I really put my mind to it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Matt, and particularly appreciate your confidence in us in sharing those personal details about your story. We really, really appreciate that trust. And then last but not least, Adam Scheidler, he, him, or they, them, is our final panelist, of course. He did his undergraduate studies in Hawaii and is now in a master's program at San Diego State in the brain development imaging labs. So he's being mentored there by Ruth Carper and Ralph Axel Mueller, who some of you, if you are into brain imaging, might be very familiar with, very well-known work. And he's doing autism research focusing on diffusion tensor imaging, which is like looking at brain connectivity. But I actually mainly know Adam through conversations mostly on Facebook that go well beyond that stuff, and I've found him to be quite a fascinating person to speak to because he's a very subtle thinker, very non-dogmatic, accepting uncertainty and the true complexity of the world. So I'm sure what he has to say will be very much in those lines.
So thank you so much for being here. I'm very honored. I don't think of myself as a particularly remarkable individual, and yet here I am on an influential panel, so it's been kind of a It's been a very emotional experience these past few days. I've been so just caught up in what am I gonna say, what am I gonna do, I don't know what to do, and it's kept me up like at least 3 days. I got no sleep the day of my flight, but I never get any sleep, so it's like, and now I'm thinking to myself, all these people with really great speeches, they all have something to write down, they all had something written down. Okay, maybe I should write a speech in like 5 minutes that I have, but so I'm just like sitting here, you know, I don't have an idea, what should I say? There's all these kind of things I can do. I could talk about this, I could talk about that, I could talk about that, I could talk about that. What should I do? And then the very simple idea comes up, why not just talk about what I want? I don't know. So I guess maybe I can start with, you know, what is autism to me and what does autism mean for me? I mean, I feel like a large part of my life has just been about who or what am I? So when I first was in school, I made a lot of friends at the beginning, or who I thought were friends, and then all of a sudden after, you know, not even a month, all of a sudden they started talking behind my back and saying this, this, or that, and then I was like, what? Then they started calling me weird, and they called it all these things, shut up, don't talk, blah, 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 and it's like, okay, so am I weird now? All right, I'll go with that. Then all of a sudden, sort of towards the end of that year in kindergarten, I mean, in first grade, all of a sudden people were like, oh, you actually have ADD. And I was like, okay, I'll just say I have ADD. And then I was walking through that till about 4th grade. And then all of a sudden, through the intervention of a 4th grade teacher and through a conversation he had with my mom, he was like, oh, he actually has Asperger's syndrome or autism. And I was like, okay, I guess I have autism now. So you know, and then I started researching it a bit more, and then I started liking all these fascinating things, and I was like, oh, people are intelligent and smart, blah, 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 blah. I was like, that's real cool. But I also have this, what I like to call like a devil's advocate in the back of my head. Like, I always like to accept things, but I also, for whatever reason, I kind of like to counterbalance stuff. So I'm like, you know, here I am, you know, being all happy about all these potentially good things about autism, such as mental benefits and things like that. And then I have to look at myself realistically and be like, you know, I'm a student who procrastinates like crazy. I don't have any special talents other than what I talk about. I play games, you know, I'm not that good, blah, 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 blah. So maybe I'm not that amazing or whatever. And then it's like, okay, whatever. and so like, I don't know, like I was cruising through most of elementary and middle school. And it was just like, what do I want to do? I don't know what am I? What do I want to do? People don't want me here, people don't want me there. What do I do? Well, who am I? What am I doing? So I eventually started, it was in 9th grade when something really started to click, and I guess I kind of was just like, you know, whatever I see people doing over there, you know, those people who are playing on the playground, those people who are talking, those people who are, you know, like, I want that. I want to participate in that. That's what I want. And it took me a while to really kind of parse what that was. And I think I sat in my room for like 4 days just basically playing mental videos of like every single interaction I've been in and every single thing, and trying to tell myself, you know, what is it other people are doing? What is it that I'm not doing? What is it that, what am I doing and what am I getting out of that interaction? What are other people doing and what are they getting out of that interaction? And I just started just going through everything. And I told myself, you know, don't pick any specific details, just figure out the patterns, figure out what those things. And I eventually, after thinking, I was like, you know, I don't want to lose this. I want to figure out, you know, put this into something. And I made a list of like rules and things to follow, and things started from there. I went to a park one time where I was talking with an individual, and I told myself, you know, if you want to hold a conversation, look them in the eyes, not all the time, let them speak, let them talk, to only talk about what they are talking about. You know, if they mention games, don't all of a sudden start talking about the philosophy of games and what the games mean and blah, 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 blah. So I just told myself, just focus on what he's saying, focus on what he's doing, and do that. And I did. He was playing a game of, like, I don't know, Family Guy or something, and then I started talking. I barely knew anything about Family Guy or what it was, and I just had a conversation with that, and it's like, this conversation, he didn't back away. He didn't tell me to shut up. He didn't tell me to leave. And I'm like, this actually did something work? Did something happen? Like, oh my God. It was like, oh my God, this is really going. But eventually I started to learn that the social rules that I made for myself and that these things that I gave myself, they had limits. And a big limit to them was my list was very self-deprecating, was like, don't be stupid, don't STEM, do all this other stuff. And it was also very restrictive. It didn't allow me to really explore who I was and be who I wanted to be. I was basically telling myself, hate autism, hate who you are, just be this other person. And eventually that didn't really work. Maybe you can call it the inflexibility of thought, but I felt like if I didn't get things perfect, or if I didn't, if I got up, all weirdly or something, then all of a sudden people were like, oh, he has autism, don't bother with him anymore. And I don't know, it's been a wild ride. In high school, I found a social group in band, and I got fairly involved with them, and that was fine, but I would have recurring bouts of, at the beginning of the week, I'd feel like I can talk and I feel like I could do things, but then towards the middle of the week, all of a sudden I'd be like, oh my God, I don't know what to say, I don't know what to do, I can't, all of these, the very automatic, you don't have time to process what's being said in a conversation, you don't have time to think about what you're saying, so you have to deal with these, this very flow-like state, and you have to be in that if you really want to talk, and it's taken me a while to really trust that, and it's taken me a while to really go into that, because I like to be slow and I like to be methodical. And so, I had that group, that was great, and then I went to college, and then it's all of a sudden like I went back into a bubble again. I would go to college and I'd be in the dorms and I'd be like, I would want to approach people and I'd want to talk, but I think it was all of those middle school and elementary school years of having approached people and not, maybe no fault of mine, maybe whatever, but just being rejected, and I didn't want to be around people. I could talk with them pretty well if just the group kind of formed, but if I had to do it on my own impetus, then it was very difficult. And what I started to learn in college is, no, you have to act on your own impetus. You have to act on who you are. You have to have this thing, because people aren't just going to come to you. If you just sit and you sit on your own, nobody's going to talk to you. That's just how it is. It's not that people want to pity you or anything. It's just how it is. And I sat in fear for most of my college life. And I thought if I could convince people I have autism, maybe things would go. If I talk with people about my insecurities and my things, maybe that would work. But then all of a sudden I started learning you can't talk about all your insecurities because people aren't therapists and things like that. So it's like all these things that I have to figure out. And so I joined band again because I thought maybe that would work. But then people would tell me that I'm fine and people would tell me that I'm okay, and then it's like, okay, but once you tell me that for that day I'm fine, but then once we go to another day, it's like something new comes, and then everybody breaks into the group and I'm like, who do I approach, who do I talk to? I don't know, so many things, I don't know. And so I don't know, people then started suggesting, oh, you don't seem to have autism, you seem to be fairly, talking right and whatever. And I myself, I like more of a bottom-up approach. I like to, look at the evidence first and go like, yeah, they're making a good argument. Maybe I'm not. But the problem also is I have a very ruminative style of thinking. So I tell myself I like to go on something, but I also know I'm biased. And for whatever reason, if I don't like the conclusion, then I start looping back into doing multiple things, and it's like, So, I was telling myself, accept it, but I wasn't, and I had this entire, I think I'm autistic because of my past, but then people are not saying I'm autistic, because it was this giant dialogue for more than 4 years. And I still don't know where I'm at. A very eye-opening experience I've had, I have this personal conundrum right now, which is when I go in front of people, I gesticulate, I talk, I can read the most, I can do all of that, right? And it's very, if you don't do that, you're not autistic, right? And I've had high levels of anxiety in my lab, and always asking people if I'm doing fine, if my work is fine, blah, 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 blah. And people always tell me, Adam, relax, you're fine, don't worry, don't. And it just never clicks with me. I just can't see whatever information that they have to access that allows them to say that I don't have that. For whatever reason, I don't know, maybe I can't see myself intellectually, or maybe I'm so in my own thoughts, I don't know. But a really eye-opening thought for me was I was talking with one of our people in our labs, because they offered to potentially give me a re-diagnosis. I've been trying to track down details of my original diagnosis, and that's been difficult. They shredded my cumulative file, which is basically where that has like all your IEP history. Luckily, I found my old IEP that was up to 6th grade, so I know that they tested me using the Gilliam scale, but I don't know exactly if they used the ADOS or whatever. So I've been very curious, where am I right now? And so they offered to do that. And when we were talking, I was talking about how I conceptualize social interaction, how I try to create this context where, oops, I hope I'm not going over, where like there's all these rules and there's all these things, but I try to convince myself that there's a logical order to it. There is a logical reason why. There's a reason why you can use this joke, or you can use a potentially offensive joke in one group of friends, but you can't use it in another group of friends. There's a reason why. And if you can understand these core things, if you can understand how these general things will work, then in your own mind, you can conceptualize and generalize where you're going as you go there. You can be like, I know this person this long, I'm this familiar with them, okay, so maybe I should act this way because of what I know, because of these things. And I was talking to her about that, and she said, it's very interesting, it's very fascinating, and these are things that a lot of other autistics have been talking about. And she was like, do you think about it often? And I told her it felt fairly automatic, because I felt like I don't have to talk about it as much. But after I started talking to her, I had this feeling like I don't want to think that much, I don't want to do much, I'm very mentally exhausted. That conversation was mentally exhausting, and I was just kind of sitting, whistling to myself, talking to myself. That's how I stim, and I've only recently been doing it again. And it was just like something was bothering me, and I didn't figure out why. And then all of a sudden I started talking to my PI, who's a very wonderful woman, and I just started breaking down crying in front of her. And what I finally realized was that, yes, I can do all of these things automatically. I can look at people and figure out all these things, but it doesn't mean that it's any less easier. It doesn't mean it's at the same, it's not, I learned to quote unquote ride the bike later in life, but that doesn't mean it's not effortful. And I started realizing that the reason why I'm anxious, the reason why I'm doing all these things is because I'm constantly asking myself, what do I need to say? What do I need to do? Am I crossing a boundary? Am I not crossing a boundary? I have had so many experiences of people being, like, Adam, you are being too much. Adam, you're being too little. And I'm always having to figure out and adjust. And I finally realized that just how online I am all the time. And I was crying in front of my PI, because I was just like, why doesn't it get any easier? And I'm kind of tearing up right now, but it's like, I would like to get to a point where the ability to interact and the ability to relate, I feel like I can relate well to people, but I would like to get to a point to where it does feel real and it does feel automatic, and I don't have to think that much, and I can just do it. But I've had to grapple with this idea that no, it won't. I can relate and I can talk, but the reality is, if I'm autistic or not is irrelevant. The true idea is, what are my difficulties and what are my actions? And I can state, if autism is disputed, that's fine. All I can say is, from my own experience, it is difficult. And I'm constantly having to do it, and I'm constantly having to figure out if I'm too much, too little, or this or that, and it's so mind-boggling. You probably have an idea, because I'm pretty sure you guys do it on your own basis, but it's so, yeah. So, but I'm also starting to realize that maybe that's not a bad thing. Maybe I can be me, maybe I can be Adam, and maybe being autistic is fine, maybe being autistic is not. Whatever it is, I'm just me. I have no idea what I am, I have no idea what I am. I very much envy people who can say I'm autistic and I know this is about me and this is who I am and I have a strong sense of, and I know I envy that because I feel like I don't have that, but I'm also telling myself that's fine. I don't have to have a strong, maybe my identity can be as I experience myself right now and as I change and go from place to place. I don't know. So that's That's me. That's what I think. Thank you.
Thank you for such a good panel, and I want to also tell the audience that, to be honest, like I was supposed to be one of the panel members here, but because of something that happened, my name is Phoenix and my pronouns are they, them. I was supposed to be a panel member, but like something happened last week. I was in another panel, and so I'm like facing through a lot of distress, and so I couldn't speak, but that was very nice of you to like, all the discussion was very nice. Sometimes I wish like, because we were like talking about like this thing, and thank you for your speech. No questions.
I'm a mom of a 16-year-old boy on the spectrum who thinks it's the worst thing in the world, and therefore struggles with his identity and finding people. What advice do you give to parents helping through those teenage years when he doesn't want to connect with the community? I think would bring him a lot of relief, but at this point he's not ready.
I guess for my thing is something I've really learned about myself and with other people is you can't really make people change unless they want to. So, and that's been a very difficult thing for me to grapple with, because it's like, you know, your life's bad and you're thinking this, and like if you think this, you'd be so fine, and like, you know, why don't you do it, right? But I mean, without knowing much of the context, I definitely say, you know, definitely maybe working with him to kind of see the idea of why it's good to connect with people. And if he can't, that doesn't mean that you don't force him, because, you know, as a parent, you do need to, you know, you can't always let your kids do what they need to do. You do need to do what's best for them, but also there's kind of a way you can put them to it. There, you know, there's that you can, if you push them too much, then they won't do anything. But if you push them a little bit, and if you guide them to it, and you guide them to do their own decision, that may be best. Now, if you're already doing that, I'm not too sure what else I can say, but definitely something that I will mention is, for me, definitely surrounding myself with very, you know, like-minded individuals, and not just like-minded, but also other individuals who can challenge me, and definitely plugging into and definitely learning about this autistic community and definitely getting into it has given me my own sense of agency and my own sense of just, you know, I don't know what to say. So I guess practically I would definitely say wherever area you're in, you know, get to know some of the resources around you, get to know, you know, is there an autistic club? Is there a meetup group? Back in San Diego, we have an autistic meetup group that we're trying to promote and we're trying to get up, and I'm telling individuals about this and they're like, what? I had no idea. We're telling individuals about resources in the community and they have no idea about it. So I definitely do think that, I mean, maybe this is just my own over-idealistic mindset, but I do feel like there's things out there. Just one part of it is definitely, you know, learning about it, unplugging. So I guess to sum up what I'm saying, two things is, you know, push him as lightly or gently as you feel needed. Even if he doesn't want to, he does need to, but also make sure that you have, you know, you keep that in mind that you can't force anybody to do anything, but also that you're a parent and you need to, because that's just how raising a child is. And then also definitely learn about organizations that are led by individuals who are neurotypical is perfectly fine, and I definitely would encourage you to seek those out, but also look for organizations that are headed by individuals who are on the spectrum or who have that kind of thing. Not blindly saying that they're on the spectrum, therefore it's good, not that, but that they're on the spectrum, and as a great quote that Damien Milton, I'm like a fan of, said one time, is like, you know, like, you know, anyway, yeah, so sorry.
I'll just say something real quick. I'll just reemphasize what Adam said. Just, I think having your child just realize that, like, he's the one that has to realize it himself eventually. He's the only one that could make that decision. I know for myself, back then, I think my parents also encouraged me to try to do things like that, but I was reluctant to do so, and I didn't. And now, in hindsight, just I know where I am now. Now I would be willing to go out and do those things, but that's just because I recognize how important they are. So I think just the most important thing is hopefully trying to get him to realize how important it is, and hopefully his just mindset changes around that.
I guess to coming from my experience with my own parents, they always try to have the best of my interest in mind. And they were trying to guide me to a lot of different things, a lot of different programs, taking me to different places to meet people who are autistic when I was younger. And for better or for worse, I learned how to make friends that way. But I think kind of echoing the same sentiments, when I was finally, ultimately it was up to my own decision to try and find out what was best for me and how to make those things happen. And it was very difficult. A lot of very depressive episodes. But going forward, I feel I've become a better person because of that, and being able to build off those things has really made me understand and appreciate, what I have and what I don't have. So thank you.
Yes. Sometimes it does take time. For me, I didn't discover that the autistic community existed until I was 17 years old. And for me, getting involved in that community took another year and a half, I would say. So it definitely can take some time. And for me, it was very overwhelming, even to get involved in the very first stages of advocacy work, because you're really putting yourself out there. And everybody goes along at their own pace in this regard. Maybe your son might never feel comfortable advocating as an openly autistic person, say, but if there are autistic-led and autistic-founded spaces in the community, I would highly encourage you both to seek them out, because seeing other autistic people taking leadership and initiative can be a very big eye-opener, and for me it definitely was. So that could be something to consider. And the whole idea of autistic culture too, once I found that out, that completely changed the way that I viewed a lot of things like stimming as something good and something to be celebrated. So sometimes a paradigm shift can be very drastic, but oftentimes it just kind of creeps along a little bit. And then once you reach a certain peak, then that realization comes to a head, and that's when everything can finally start to fall into place. So patience, I think, is key.
So I am in a little bit at a different time in parenting. So I have a 5-year-old autistic boy, and my question to you is, when did your parents, or when did you realize, or did they introduce that topic to you and let you know that you were autistic? And also, how and when would you, do you have recommendations, or do you have kind of thoughts about how and when that might be appropriate?
So I guess I was so first. I was diagnosed when I was 6 years old in 1996. And that was like in the early days of the ADA and that kind of stuff. One of the things that I think I mentioned in my speech, no one actually ever told me what autism was, and I was very fascinating, because looking back on it, I actually find it very strange that no one ever decided to tell me what specifically that was and what it entailed, other than here are the symptoms, you might need help in school, and here are some programs you can get involved with. And the thing is that I actually didn't know what autism was until after I graduated high school. I didn't bother to look it up until I decided to go do research on my own, because all the professionals I actually met never told me. They just told me, well, here's a certain degree of medication, here's the thing you can do to keep you on track, and we're going to have you run this program, that kind of thing. And when I was in high school, it was very depressive, because I always found myself alone and without people to talk to. And had I known that there was something like this, an autistic community, autistic culture that exists outside of my very bleak world, maybe perhaps it'd be a little different. I think the challenge is, when I came to realize it myself, and I understand that now it's become a more understood issue, especially with professionals and academia and the institutions of medical care alike, it has now become more accepting, more open to engage people, not just as subjects of a policy or subjects of a program, but rather as individuals and as people. And I think that's a dynamic that's really changing, because it's no longer an aspect of us just being subject to certain aspects of the law and subject to certain aspects of thought, but rather being the subjects of our own choosing. And I think that's going to be a faster development that we're going to see in the future. And I'm far more hopeful about the young people today being engaged and being a part of our community, as opposed to when I was a child back in the early 90s. I think that it's a far greater chance of creating acceptance and creating that sense of community, and I'm really hopeful in that.
Well, I was diagnosed pretty late, the day after my 18th birthday, but I think my family, as well as my preschool teachers, had some suspicions when I was younger. Anecdotally, I was known to line up toys as a kid, and in preschool I did definitely have some trouble with sensory overload and some panic attacks. But I guess I was able to mask my autistic traits so well that it wasn't really until I started doing research on my own that I started to realize that maybe I am autistic. So I think it's different for every person. And in terms of how to approach the dialogue with your son, I think it might be helpful to say, because you're autistic, this is why, maybe this is why you're overwhelmed by loud noises or bright lights, or maybe you're autistic and that allows you to experience music in such a profound way. So emphasizing not only the challenges, but also explaining the strengths is very important.
Yeah, I just wanted to say one quick thing. So if you haven't looked for services yet and you haven't plugged your son in, I just wanted to say that if you're feeling reluctant about that, research has kind of shown that the earlier intervention and definitely getting kids earlier access to good services produces some of the better benefits and leads to more well-adjusted people.
The UC Davis Mind Institute was created in 1998 with a promise to find cures for neurodevelopmental disorders. Every day, our physicians and researchers come closer to fulfilling that promise. Their groundbreaking research on autism, Fragile X syndrome, chromosome 22q11.2 deletion syndrome, ADHD, and other brain disorders are helping children achieve their fullest potential. Please visit our website to find out more about current studies, upcoming events, and how you can help make a difference.